BBC News, hello, I'm Gareth Barlow. People in North Korea have told the BBC food is so scarce their neighbours have starved to death. Exclusive interviews gathered inside the world's most isolated state describe beggars dying in the streets and no grain in some markets. There's been concern for some months that North Korea is experiencing severe shortages. Food imports ceased when borders closed during the COVID pandemic. G. Mackenzie has more details.
The very fact that we interviewed 3 people and 2 of them came back to us to tell us that their neighbours had starved to death, that was surprising. And people have said to us that that does suggest that the food situation is much worse than we had expected or that we had, thought it was. And it probably is the worst that it has been since that major famine in North Korea in the late 1990s.
The Greek government has described the deaths of at least 79 people in a shipwreck as one of the country's biggest migrant tragedies. 3 days of mourning have been declared. An official in Greece's migration ministry told the BBC that 104 people had been rescued. He could not confirm reports that several hundred people are still missing. A migrant charity that alerted the Coast Guard said the captain had abandoned the ship. One of the leading scientists in the field of artificial intelligence has rejected claims that the technology could suddenly take over the world. Professor Yann LeCun is the chief AI scientist for Meta, the owner of Facebook. Last month, dozens of AI experts warned that it could lead to the extinction of humanity. Chris Vallance reports.
On a swelteringly hot day in Paris, Professor LeCun told an invited gathering of tech journalists fears that a powerful AI might be developed and suddenly take over the world were preposterous. Human-level artificial intelligence was years, maybe even decades away, he said, and AI wouldn't cause huge unemployment, though it would change work. Jobs in 20 years' time might be as unimaginable as being a YouTube star would have been a generation ago.
The Australian government is to prevent Russia building a new embassy near Parliament in Canberra. Legislation to prevent the development took less than 5 minutes to be introduced and passed. Here's Phil Mercer in Sydney.
The Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said a new Russian embassy so close to Parliament House would pose a threat to national security. His government has brought in legislation that would terminate the Russian Federation's lease on the land. The move doesn't affect Russia's existing embassy in suburban Canberra. Mr. Albanese has again condemned Moscow's illegal and immoral invasion of Ukraine. He's rejected suggestions that Australia wasn't doing enough to support Kyiv's war effort.
World news from the BBC. A grand jury in New York has ordered a man to stand trial for manslaughter for allegedly choking a homeless man to death last month on a Manhattan subway train. Racial justice protesters said police had been too slow to arrest Daniel Penny, a white former Marine sergeant, over the death of Jordan Neely, a black man who'd been struggling with mental illness. Dissident FARC rebels in Colombia have denied an accusation from the father of 4 children rescued from the jungle last week that they'd threatened his family, causing them to flee their home. The dissidents said they had friendly relations with the indigenous communities who the family belonged to. The children were found 40 days after the plane they were leaving on crashed, killing their mother. India and Pakistan have evacuated more than 100,000 people from the path of a severe storm approaching from the Arabian Sea. Cyclone Biparjoy is expected to make landfall later on Thursday on the shores of the Indian state of Gujarat and Pakistan's adjoining province of Sindh. Indian forecasters have warned of high winds, powerful storm surges, and also of flash floods. The American author Barbara Kingsolver has won this year's Women's Prize for Fiction for her novel Demon Copperhead. She's the first writer to win it for a second time. The book is a retelling of Charles Dickens's classic David Copperfield set in the Appalachian Mountains. The founder-director of the prize, Kate Moss, praised the novel.
It's the most extraordinary achievement that it completely follows David Copperfield and Dickens's story of a young boy and born into poverty and very much Victorian England. And she has followed that arc, but at the same time, it's completely unique work. And you are rooting for Demon from the start. He has a terrible start in life, but it's just a beautiful but searing novel.
BBC News.